November 1944. The skies over Yugoslavia. A lone American P-38 Lightning carves through hostile airspace, fuel gauge bleeding toward empty. 9 Soviet Yak fighters close formation around him. Radio crackles. Ground stations order him to land. He knows what landing means. Internment. Interrogation. Months, maybe years, locked away while the war grinds on without him. His squadron thinks he's dead. Intelligence briefed him that the Soviets would never fire on an ally. They were wrong. The Adriatic coast stretches below, gray and indifferent under November clouds. This is the Balkans in the final year of the war, a theater where allegiances shift like smoke and survival depends on reading the spaces between orders. Allied pilots flying from Italian bases strike targets deep in German-held territory. Austria, Hungary, Romania. Long missions over mountains where the air is thin and unforgiving. When they return, they fly corridors mapped by diplomats, not airmen. Narrow lanes of sky where one wrong turn puts you over territory held by partisans, Ustasha, Chetniks, or the Red Army. The rules are clear. Soviet forces are allies. If mechanical failure or battle damage forces a landing in Soviet-controlled zones, pilots are to comply with instructions and accept temporary custody until repatriation. Standard procedure, diplomatic courtesy. But the reality on the ground tells a different story. Pilots who land in Soviet territory vanish into bureaucratic fog. Weeks pass, then months. Requests for their release meet polite delays. The machinery of alliance grinds slow when convenient. These men are leverage, bargaining chips in a larger game no one will explain. Pilots know this. They whisper it in ready rooms. They've seen the lists, the names that don't come back. November 7th, a P-38 Lightning lifts off from Foggia, Italy, part of a bomber escort mission deep into enemy airspace. The twin-boom silhouette is unmistakable, fast, maneuverable, heavily armed, but also thirsty. Range is always the limiting factor. Fuel margins are calculated to the minute. There is no buffer for deviation. The pilot is a lieutenant, experienced, disciplined. He has flown this route before. He knows the checkpoints, the altitudes, the frequencies. He knows the gray zone over Yugoslavia where Soviet and German lines blur together. He knows to stay west of Niš. The mission proceeds as planned until it doesn't. Flak over the target. Evasive maneuvers. The formation scatters, regroups. Minutes later, the escort peels away, each plane threading its own path home through the weather. The P-38 pilot checks his fuel. Lower than expected, manageable. He adjusts heading, calculates airspeed. He can make it. Then the weather closes in. Cloud layers thicken, visibility drops, navigation becomes guesswork. He flies by compass and instinct, trusting his instruments, watching the fuel gauge creep downward. The Adriatic should appear soon, then the coast, then safety. Instead, he breaks through clouds and sees flat plains. Unfamiliar terrain, a city in the distance, smoke rising from rail yards. He realizes his mistake immediately. The wind pushed him east. He is over Niš, Soviet-held territory. He banks west, climbs back into cloud cover. But it's too late. Somewhere below, an air defense network has already painted him. Telephone lines hum, orders transmit. A squadron of Yak fighters scrambles from a nearby airfield. The first Yak appears off his left wing, without warning, then another, then 5 more. They form up around him, close enough to see the red stars on their fuselages. They do not open fire. Instead, they gesture. Unmistakable commands. Follow us. Land. He shakes his head, points west, signals he is Allied, American, returning to base. The Yak pilots do not respond. They tighten formation. He is boxed in now, 9 fighters surrounding him in a cage of aluminum and engine noise. His fuel is critically low. He has minutes, not hours. If he follows them to a Soviet airfield, he will not fly again for months, maybe longer. His war will end in a barracks somewhere, filling out forms in a language he doesn't speak, waiting for diplomats to decide his fate. He told his crew chief once that the worst thing a pilot could do was surrender options. As long as the engine runs, as long as the controls respond, there is always a choice. Even a bad one. The Yaks close tighter. One pulls directly in front, slowing, forcing him to match speed. Another slides beneath him, cutting off any dive. They are herding him east, toward the airfield. He can see it now, a smudge of concrete and hangars on the horizon. He thinks about fuel, about time, about the distance to the Adriatic. He does the math. It's impossible. No margin, no reserve. But impossible is a word that shifts meaning at altitude. He remembers a briefing 6 weeks earlier. A fighter pilot from another squadron grounded after a training incident, giving an informal talk on evasion tactics. Most of the pilots ignored it. Standard doctrine already covered evasion, hard turns, speed, altitude advantage. Everyone knew the basics. But this pilot talked about something different, something that sounded insane, a maneuver that defied instinct. He claimed it could break a pursuit when all conventional options failed. Other pilots laughed, called it suicide, told him he'd been grounded for good reason. The lieutenant didn't laugh. He listened, took notes, asked questions. The instructor seemed surprised. He explained the physics, the timing, the risks. He admitted he'd never tried it in combat. Only theory. Only practice runs over empty desert. The lieutenant filed it away. Unlikely to ever matter. But he understood the logic. And logic, under pressure, becomes reflex. Now, surrounded by 9 fighters, fuel bleeding away, the memory surfaces. He runs through the variables: airspeed, altitude, engine response, the proximity of the Yaks, their likely reactions. It should not work. It violates every doctrine. But doctrine assumes rational limits. And rational limits assume you plan to land somewhere alive. He makes his decision. If this history matters to you, tap like and subscribe. Before the war, he was a mechanic's son from Indiana. Flat farmland, straight roads, horizons you could measure with a ruler. His father ran a small airfield outside Terre Haute, servicing crop dusters and the occasional private plane. The boy grew up smelling aviation fuel and hot oil, learning to read engines by sound. He soloed at 16. No formal instruction. His father simply handed him the keys to a Piper Cub one morning and told him to figure it out. He did. 3 landings, each one smoother than the last. His father nodded, said nothing. That was praise enough. He understood machines, not from books, but from observation. He watched how components interacted, how stress distributed through a frame, how physics and engineering were just different words for consequences. If you pushed something beyond its design limits, it either adapted or failed. The key was knowing which before you pushed. In high school, he rebuilt a motorcycle engine that 2 other mechanics had declared unsalvageable, scored cylinder walls, cracked block. He machined new parts, improvised seals, and had it running in 6 weeks. It leaked oil and burned rich, but it ran. That was the point. Running ugly was better than dead perfect. He enrolled in a state college to study aeronautical engineering. Lasted 1 semester. The professors taught theory without constraints. Beautiful equations that assumed perfect conditions, frictionless surfaces, ideal compression. He asked what happened when the numbers didn't match reality, when parts wore unevenly, when fuel was contaminated, when a pilot had seconds instead of slide rules. They told him those were practical concerns, not academic ones. He left. He joined the Army Air Forces in early 1942. Cadet training at Thunderbird Field, Arizona. The instructors liked him. Quiet, methodical, never showed off. He flew like he built engines, economically, no wasted movement, no unnecessary risk. But when the situation called for it, he pushed limits others wouldn't approach. Advanced training in California transitioned to the P-38 Lightning. Twin engines, tricycle landing gear, counter-rotating propellers. A complex machine that rewarded precision. He spent hours studying the manual. Not just procedures, but tolerances, stress limits, engine performance curves at different altitudes and temperatures. Other pilots memorized checklists. He memorized why the checklists existed, what happened if you deviated, how much margin the engineers had built in, where the real boundaries lay. He arrived in Italy in the spring of 1944, 5th 10th Air Force, long-range escort missions into Central Europe. The air war here was attritional, flak over targets, fighters on the return leg. Pilots measured survival in missions completed, not days survived. He flew 43 missions without serious incident, not because he was lucky, because he calculated risk in real time and stayed inside the envelope. When other pilots pushed for kills, he stayed with the bombers. When formations broke apart, he navigated alone, trusting instruments over instinct. His squadron mates respected him, didn't particularly like him. He was too precise, too distant. He didn't drink much, didn't tell stories. After debriefs, he'd return to his tent and sketch mechanical diagrams, improvements to the turbocharger system, adjustments to control cable routing. Ideas no one asked for, but they noticed he always brought his plane home. And in a theater where operational losses rivaled combat losses, that mattered. In October, during a mission over Hungary, his wingman took flak damage and lost an engine. Standard procedure was to escort him as far as possible, then let him glide toward friendly territory. The lieutenant stayed with him for 90 miles, far beyond safe fuel margins, talking him through the descent, identifying fields, calculating glide ratios. They both made it back. His wingman wrote him up for a commendation. The lieutenant never mentioned it again. 3 weeks later, the squadron got a new addition. A pilot who'd been grounded after a training accident clipped another plane during a formation drill. Review board found him at fault. Reckless maneuvering. Too aggressive. They pulled him from active rotation and assigned him to base duties. The pilot was bitter. Talked constantly about the politics of flight status. How caution was rewarded over skill. How the war would be won by men willing to break rules, not follow them. Most pilots tuned him out. But one afternoon, bored and restless, he gave an informal talk in the ready room. He called it unconventional evasion tactics. A handful of pilots showed up, mostly out of curiosity. He talked about energy management, about using gravity and momentum in ways that defied pursuit logic. He described a maneuver he'd been developing. Theoretical, untested in combat, based on observations of how fighters pursued damaged bombers. The idea was simple. When boxed in by multiple fighters, instead of trying to outrun or outturn them, you do the opposite. You decelerate violently, drop flaps, cut throttle, force the aircraft into a near stall at the edge of control. Pursuers, traveling faster, overshoot. Their formation breaks. For a few seconds, you're behind them instead of in front. Then you dive. Full throttle. Use gravity to rebuild speed before they can reorient. By the time they turn, you're gone, low and fast, using terrain to break visual contact. One pilot asked the obvious question. What if you stall completely? What if the engine flames out? The grounded pilot shrugged. Then you die. But if you're already dead anyway, what's the risk? Most pilots laughed, called it a desperation move, suicide disguised as tactics. The lieutenant didn't laugh. He sat in the back, running the physics. He saw the logic. He also saw the flaws. Timing would be everything. Too early, and the pursuers would adjust. Too late, and you'd stall into an unrecoverable spin. Engine. Response after throttle cut was unpredictable. The P-38's twin engines complicated things further. Asymmetric thrust could flip you inverted. After the talk, he approached the grounded pilot, asked technical questions. Airspeed thresholds, flap angles, recovery altitude. The pilot seemed surprised anyone took him seriously. They talked for an hour. The lieutenant asked if anyone had actually done it. The pilot admitted no, only simulated in controlled conditions over empty desert. No live pursuit, no combat variables. The lieutenant nodded, thanked him, walked away. He didn't practice the maneuver, didn't discuss it with his squadron, but he filed it mentally alongside every other edge case solution he'd cataloged over the years. The kind of knowledge you hope never to use. 3 weeks later, surrounded by 9 Soviet fighters over niche, fuel gauge in the red, that knowledge surfaces. The problem no one had solved was diplomatic, and in war, diplomacy moved slower than aircraft. By the fall of 1944, Soviet forces had pushed deep into the Balkans. Belgrade fell in October. Nias followed shortly after. The Red Army now controlled key rail hubs and airfields across southern Yugoslavia. Officially, they were liberating territory from German occupation. Officially, they were allies. But the coordination was fractured. Soviet air defense networks operated independently. Their radar stations tracked all aircraft, allied or otherwise. Their fighter squadrons scrambled on standing orders, intercept unidentified contacts, force compliance, protect territorial sovereignty. American and British bombers, flying missions into Austria and Romania, often strayed into Soviet-controlled airspace. Navigation errors, weather, battle damage. The reasons varied. The result was the same. Soviet fighters intercepted them, ordered them to land, detained crews. Repatriation was supposed to be routine. International agreements guaranteed it. But in practice, delays mounted. Soviet commanders cited security concerns, verification procedures, bureaucratic protocols that stretched weeks into months. By November, more than 60 Allied airmen were interned in Soviet custody, some in Yugoslavia, others deeper inside Soviet territory. Requests for their release were met with polite acknowledgments and no action. Intelligence officers in Italy compiled reports. They noted patterns. Pilots who landed voluntarily were processed faster than those who resisted. Planes that landed intact were examined thoroughly, sometimes disassembled before being returned. The Soviets were studying Allied aircraft, engines, avionics, tactical systems. The situation was sensitive. Publicly, the alliance held firm. Privately, tension grew. American commanders issued directives. Avoid Soviet airspace when possible. If intercepted, comply with instructions but request immediate contact with Allied liaison officers. Do not resist. But pilots saw the reality. Compliance meant internment, and internment meant the war continued without you. Some tried to evade. When Soviet fighters appeared, they ran. A few made it. Most didn't. The Yaks were nimble at low altitude. They knew the terrain. They had fuel reserves in nearby airfields. A damaged or low-fuel P-38 had no advantage. One pilot, intercepted near the Hungarian border, tried to outrun 4 Yaks. He pushed his engines past redline, held speed for 12 minutes. Then his right engine seized. He crash-landed in a field, broke both legs, spent 4 months in a Soviet hospital before repatriation. Another pilot, boxed in by 6 Yaks, attempted a sharp descending turn into a canyon, hoped to lose them in the terrain. He misjudged the clearance. Wingtip clipped rock. The plane cartwheeled into the canyon floor. No survivors. The patterns were clear. Conventional evasion didn't work. Speed wasn't enough. Maneuverability wasn't enough. The numbers were against you. Commanders emphasized compliance, follow orders, land safely, trust the diplomatic process. It was logical advice. It minimized casualties, but it also meant accepting months of captivity while missions continued without you. Some pilots began discussing alternatives. Unofficial conversations, late-night talk intense between missions. What if you didn't comply? What if you forced their hand? The Soviets wouldn't shoot down an Allied plane. Everyone believed that. The political consequences were too severe. So interceptions were psychological, a show of overwhelming force. You comply because resistance seems futile, not because they'll kill you. But what if you called the bluff? Most pilots dismissed the idea. Too risky. The Soviets might not fire, but they didn't have to. They could force you into a flight profile that burned your remaining fuel. They could box you in until your options evaporated, and if you did something unpredictable, if you startled a Soviet pilot into a split-second decision, politics wouldn't stop bullets. The problem remained unsolved. Avoid Soviet airspace or accept internment. No middle ground. Then came November 7th. The Yak pilots are professional, disciplined, they hold formation, adjusting smoothly as the P-38 makes small course corrections. They don't gesture aggressively, don't waggle wings or fire warning shots. Their presence is the warning. The lieutenant watches them, counts them again. 9, 3 ahead, 2 on each side, 2 behind. Textbook intercept formation, overlapping fields of fire, no escape vector. His fuel gauge shows 8 minutes. Maybe 10 if he leans the mixture, but that risks engine roughness. He needs full power available. 10 minutes isn't enough to reach the Adriatic, not even close. The math is absolute. The lead Yak slows further. The lieutenant matches. Airspeed drops below cruising efficiency. He's burning fuel just to maintain formation. Every second costs options. He considers landing, running the numbers one more time. Internment versus the alternative. Weeks versus minutes. Certainty versus chance. His hands rest on the controls. Steady. No tension. He learned long ago that decision-making under stress required physical calm. Let the body stay quiet so the mind could move quickly. He thinks about the grounded pilot's briefing. The impossible maneuver. Decelerate into the pursuit. Let them overshoot. Dive and run. It sounded insane in a ready room. It sounds worse now. But the logic holds. The Yaks are faster than him in a straight chase, more maneuverable in a turning fight. But they're also lighter, less mass, less inertia. If he forces a sudden speed change, their momentum works against them. The risks are obvious. Stall and spin at low altitude means death. Asymmetric thrust in a P-38 during a stall can invert the aircraft. Engine response after throttle chop is unpredictable. If the turbos lag, he won't have power when he needs it. And there's another variable no one discussed. 9 aircraft in close formation. If he decelerates suddenly, they don't just overshoot, they scatter. 9 planes braking in different directions, each pilot reacting independently. Collision risk, confusion. For a few seconds, their coordination breaks. That's the window. Not to escape, just to create chaos. To turn a controlled intercept into a scramble, then dive before they reorganize. He considers the altitude. 4,200 feet. Enough for a dive. Barely. The terrain below is flat, no mountains to dodge, but also no cover. He considers the fuel. 7 minutes now. If the maneuver fails, if he stalls, he won't recover. If it works, he still has to outrun them on fumes. The Adriatic is 40 miles west, 4 minutes at full throttle. Except he doesn't have 4 minutes of fuel. Unless he glides the last mile. Engine off descent. Silent. No heat signature. The Yaks would overshoot again, expecting him to maintain power. By the time they realize, he'd be over water, too low for them to intercept. He could ditch near the coast, swim ashore, survive. It's not a plan. It's a sequence of increasingly desperate gambles, each one depending on the one before. But it's better than landing. He makes his decision. First step. Signal compliance. He adjusts heading, follows the lead Yak toward the airfield, holds formation. The Yaks relax slightly. They've done this before. Allied pilots always comply eventually. He waits. Lets them settle, lets their attention drift from active intercept to routine escort. 30 seconds. 40. The airfield grows closer. 2 minutes out. Now. He chops both throttles, simultaneously drops full flaps. The P-38 shudders, airspeed collapses, the nose pitches up. Every instinct screams to add power. He ignores it. The Yaks overshoot immediately. The lead aircraft shoots forward suddenly 100 yards ahead. The side escorts blow past, their pilots caught mid-breath. The two behind brake left and right, reflexive avoidance. For 3 seconds, the formation is chaos. The P-38 hangs in the air, mushing, buffeting on the edge of stall. The stall warning shakes the stick. Airspeed bleeds through 90 knots, 80. The controls go soft. He shoves the nose down, yanks, flaps up, slams both throttles forward. The engines spool. Turbos lag for a heartbeat, then catch. Power floods back. The P-38 dives, 40 degrees, 50. Gravity pulls him through 200 knots. The Yaks are above now, scattered, turning hard to reacquire. But he's already gone, low and fast, 30 feet off the deck. Full throttle, westbound. The Yaks recover quickly, professional pilots. They don't panic. They roll into pursuit, dive after him. But he has a 6-second head start and gravity on his side. He hits 260, 280. The ground blurs. Behind him, 9 fighters give chase. They're faster in level flight. But he's not flying level. He's riding the edge of control, using every bit of ground effect, every ounce of momentum. His fuel gauge reads 3 minutes. The Adriatic is still 30 miles out. He starts calculating the glide. The ground rushes past at 300 feet per second. Trees, fields, the occasional farmhouse, everything a gray-brown smear. The P-38's twin engines scream at war emergency power. Temperature gauges climb into the red. He ignores them. Behind him, the Yaks close formation and dive. They're disciplined. No wild maneuvering, just steady pursuit. They know the physics. He's burning fuel. They have reserves. Time is on their side. The lieutenant holds altitude at 30 feet. Any lower and a wingtip could catch. Any higher, and he loses ground effect. The plane rides a cushion of compressed air, gaining a few knots of speed. Not much. But in a race measured in seconds, everything counts. He checks the fuel. 2 minutes, maybe 90 seconds. The needles hover near empty. He's running on fumes and momentum. The terrain ahead is flat. No cover, no canyons, nowhere to break visual contact. Just open farmland stretching toward the horizon. The Adriatic is there, somewhere beyond sight. 25 miles. 4 minutes at this speed. He has 90 seconds of fuel. The math doesn't work. It never did. He knew that before he started. But the maneuver bought him time. 6 seconds. Then 30. Now almost 2 minutes. Long enough to get close. Close enough that ditching becomes survival instead of suicide. The Yaks are a quarter-mile back. Closing. They're faster but cautious. Flying low at high speed is dangerous. One miscalculation and you're a crater. They maintain a buffer. Let their speed advantage grind him down. He considers his options. He can't outrun them. Can't outturn them. Can't climb. The only variable left is fuel. Theirs versus his. Except they have fuel and he doesn't, unless he stops using his. The plan forms in seconds. Cut engines before they die. Glide. The P-38 has a glide ratio of about 9-to-1. From 30 feet, that's nothing. But if he climbs first, trades speed for altitude, he can stretch it. 1,000 feet gives him a mile. 2,000 gives him 2. But climbing means slowing. The Yaks would close immediately. They'd box him in again. He'd stall halfway up. No dive to save him this time, unless they don't expect it. He needs confusion, another break in their formation, another moment of chaos, something unpredictable. He thinks about the Soviet pilots, their training, their doctrine. They've been chasing him for 3 minutes, watching him run in a straight line, low and fast, predictable. By now they expect him to hold this profile until his fuel dies, then glide, then crash, or ditch. They'll follow him down, circle the wreck, radio the position. What they don't expect is for him to turn toward them. He checks the fuel gauge. 45 seconds, maybe 30. The engines could quit any moment. He has one chance. He pulls back on the yoke, hard. The P-38's nose rises, 30 degrees, 40. The airspeed drops, 280, 250, 220. He trades speed for altitude, 300 feet, 600. The Yaks react instantly. They pull up, matching his climb, tightening the gap. They think he's trying to gain altitude for a better glide. Logical, predictable. At 900 feet, he rolls inverted, pulls through. A split S in reverse. The nose drops toward the ground, straight toward the pursuing Yaks. For a half second, he's head-on with 9 Soviet fighters. They scatter, reflexive, collision avoidance. No time to think, just react. The formation explodes outward. 3 brake left, 4 brake right, 2 pull vertical. He rolls upright and dives through the gap they just created. Full throttle. The engines give him everything. 10 seconds, 15. Then the right engine coughs, sputters, fuel starvation. He punches the left throttle forward. Asymmetric thrust. The plane yaws. He corrects with rudder. The left engine runs for 5 more seconds. Then silence. Both engines quit within a heartbeat of each other. The propellers windmill. The sudden quiet is disorienting. No roar, no vibration, just wind noise and the hum of control surfaces. He's at 1,200 feet, airspeed 200 knots. He pulls the nose up, bleeds speed into altitude, 1,500 feet, 17. The airspeed drops to 160. He levels off. Behind him, the Yaks recover from the scatter. They regroup, spot him, begin pursuit. But he's not running anymore. He's gliding. The P-38 descends at a shallow angle. He trims for best glide speed. 140 knots. The world goes quiet. No engine noise, just wind. The plane feels lighter, almost peaceful. The Yaks close fast. But they're confused. They orbit him. Watch him descend. No power, no threat. Already dead. They follow, but at a distance, waiting for the crash. He glides west. The terrain passes below. Slower now, no engine to push him, just gravity and aerodynamics. He calculates the descent rate, about 800 feet per minute. He has maybe 2 minutes aloft. The horizon lightens. A line of silver gray. Water, the Adriatic. He's not going to make it. He can see that now. The coast is still 3 miles out. He's at 800 feet, descending. The math is clear. He'll hit ground a mile short. But a mile short of the coast is still partisan territory, not Soviet-controlled. If he survives the landing, he has a chance. If he ditches in the shallows, even better. The Yaks circle. One pulls alongside. The pilot stares across the gap. 50 yards. The Soviet pilot's face is visible. Young, surprised. He gestures, motions downward, telling him to land. The lieutenant shakes his head, points west. The Soviet pilot holds his gaze for a moment, then peels away. The Yaks don't follow him down. They circle once more, then turn east, back toward Nish. Their fuel is low too, and there's no point. The P-38 is a glider now, already finished. The lieutenant is alone, 500 feet. The coast is a mile ahead. He's not going to make it over land. He'll hit water, maybe 100 yards offshore. Shallow, survivable, 300 feet. The beach is visible, rocky, no boats, no people, just empty shoreline. The water looks flat, gray, cold, 100 feet. He tightens his harness, unlocks the canopy, braces. 50 feet. The water rushes up. He flares, pulls the nose up, bleeds off speed. The tail hits first, then the fuselage. The plane skips once, twice, then noses down. The impact is violent. Water explodes around the canopy. The airframe shudders. Metal screams. The plane slews sideways, then stops. He's weightless for a moment, Then everything is cold. Water pours into the cockpit. He yanks the harness release, kicks free, pulls himself out. The plane is sinking. He swims clear. The water is shallow. His feet touch bottom, 4 feet deep. He stands, wades toward shore. Behind him, the P-38 settles into the silt. Both booms above water. The cockpit submerged. He reaches the beach, collapses on the rocks, breathing hard, shaking. Not from fear, from cold, from adrenaline crash. He's alive. He looks east. The sky is empty. The Yaks are gone. He looks west. The Adriatic stretches to the horizon. He made it. 3 hours later, partisan scouts found him. He was still sitting on the beach, drying his flight suit, watching the P-38's tail booms protrude from the shallows like grave markers. The partisans spoke broken English. They gave him a blanket, bread, water. Asked him which side he fought for. He showed them his dog tags. They nodded. Allies. Good. They would take him west, to the coast, where British boats ran supply missions. It took 4 days, walking at night, hiding during the day. The partisans moved quietly through the hills, avoiding both German patrols and Soviet checkpoints. The lines were blurred here. Authorities shifted by the hour. They trusted no one. On the 4th night, they reached a coastal village. A Royal Navy motor launch waited offshore. The partisans signaled with a lamp. The boat approached. He waded out, climbed aboard. By dawn, he was in Italy. Debriefing took 2 days. Intelligence officers wanted details, the intercept, the evasion, how he escaped 9 fighters. He described the maneuver, the throttle chop, the stall, the dive. They took notes, asked him to repeat certain sections, drew diagrams. One officer asked if he thought the Soviets would have shot him down. He said he didn't know, he didn't wait to find out. They asked if the maneuver was part of standard training. He said no. It was something he'd heard once. Theoretical. He made it work. The officers exchanged looks. They asked if he would teach it, brief other pilots. He said he could, but he didn't recommend it. Too many variables, too easy to stall. It was a desperation move. Last resort. They thanked him, told him to rest. He returned to his squadron 3 days later. The story spread quickly, not officially, just word of mouth. Pilot talk. A P-38 evaded 9 Yaks over Nish, pulled some kind of crazy stall maneuver, glided to the coast on empty tanks, walked out 4 days later. Other pilots wanted details. He gave them, objectively, clinically. He described the physics, the timing, the risks. He emphasized the risks. Told them it could easily have killed him. Told them not to try it unless they had no other option. But the idea took hold. Not as doctrine, as possibility, proof that evasion was feasible, that compliance wasn't the only option. 2 weeks later, another P-38 pilot was intercepted by Soviet fighters near the Romanian border. 6 Yaks. Same scenario, orders to land. The pilot remembered the story from Nish. He tried the maneuver, chopped throttle, dropped flaps. The Yaks overshot. He dove, outran them, made it back to base. A month later, a P-47 pilot used a variation over Hungary. 4 Yaks. He didn't have the P-38's glide ratio, so he adapted. Stalled into the pursuit, dove, then used terrain masking instead of gliding. It worked. By January, the tactic had spread across the theater. Pilots discussed it in ready rooms, compared notes, refined the technique. It never became official. Commanders didn't endorse it. Too risky, too unpredictable. But pilots used it anyway. When the alternative was internment, risk became acceptable. The Soviets adapted. Intercept formations widened. Pilots were briefed on the tactic, warned to expect sudden deceleration, maintain spacing, don't overshoot. Some interceptions became more aggressive, warning shots, closer formations. But the psychological edge had shifted. Allied pilots no longer saw Soviet intercepts as inevitable capture. They saw options, dangerous options, but options nonetheless. Internment rates dropped, not dramatically, but measurably. Intelligence reports noted the change. Fewer Allied pilots in Soviet custody, more successful evasions. The diplomatic tension eased slightly. Repatriation requests were processed faster. The leverage had shifted. By the end of the war, the exact number of successful evasions using the stall maneuver was unclear. Estimates ranged from 8 to 15. Several pilots died attempting it. Stalled too low, lost control, hit the ground, but others made it, glided to safety, walked home. The lieutenant flew 19 more missions, completed his tour in March 1945. He never attempted the maneuver again. Never needed to. He returned to the States in April, received a Distinguished Flying Cross. The citation mentioned his evasion over Yugoslavia, but gave no details. Just extraordinary airmanship and courage under hostile conditions. He didn't attend the ceremony. He was already back in Indiana, working at his father's airfield, rebuilding engines. 60 years later, a historian found the after-action report buried in National Archives records. 15 pages, typed on onion skin, faded. The historian was researching Soviet-Allied air incidents during the final months of the war. Most reports were routine. This one wasn't. The historian tracked down the pilot. Retirement home in Illinois, 91 years old, sharp. He remembered the intercept clearly, described it without embellishment, talked about fuel consumption rates and stall speeds. He still thought about the physics. The historian asked if he was afraid. The pilot paused, said fear wasn't the right word. Concern was closer. Concern that the math wouldn't work, that the engines wouldn't respond, that he'd miscalculated the glide. Fear implied uncertainty. He knew exactly what could go wrong. That wasn't fear. That was just information. The historian asked if he considered himself brave. The pilot shook his head. He made a choice, weighed variables, acted. Bravery implied something extraordinary. He just used the tools available. A stall is a stall. Gravity is gravity. You either understand the system or you don't. The historian published the account in a military aviation journal. It generated mild interest. A few letters, a small mention in a documentary about P-38 operations, but mostly it faded. One more footnote in a war full of them. The pilot passed away in 2009. Quiet funeral, family only. His son found boxes of papers in the attic, flight logs, technical diagrams, sketches of engine modifications, letters from other pilots who'd used the maneuver, thanking him, crediting him, telling him it saved their lives. His son donated the papers to an aviation museum in Indiana. They sit in climate-controlled storage, rarely viewed, occasionally referenced. The maneuver itself is no longer taught. Modern aircraft have different performance envelopes, different escape options, ejection seats, advanced avionics. The physics remain the same, but the context has shifted. But the principle endures. In every cockpit, every decision made under pressure. The understanding that systems have tolerances, that limits are not walls, but gradients, that survival sometimes means operating at the edge of design parameters, not the center. The lieutenant never considered himself exceptional. He saw a problem, applied logic, accepted consequences, that's all. No heroism, no drama, just mechanics and choice. But 9 Soviet pilots watched an American P-38 do something impossible. Watched it stall in midair, fall, recover, and vanish toward the horizon. Watched it glide 40 miles on empty tanks and land in the sea. They returned to base and filed reports, warned others, adjusted tactics. And across Italy, pilots heard the story and filed it away. Just in case the fuel ran dry and the options narrowed, and the only choice left was between surrender and physics. One man, one decision, one afternoon over Yugoslavia. The ripple moved outward, quiet, persistent, uncounted. History remembers the bombers and the aces, the missions that turned wars, the battles with names. But wars are also won in moments no one sees, in improvised solutions and desperate physics, in the space between doctrine and survival. The lieutenant understood that. He lived it at 30 feet, engines dead, gliding toward a beach he couldn't see. And when his wheels touched water and the cockpit flooded and he stood shivering on wet rocks, he didn't feel victorious. He felt cold and alive and ready to calculate the walk home. That's enough. That's everything.